This video is a sequel to our Three Kingdoms Furious Wild DLC review uploaded last year, which covered the previous DLC release. At a time when it seems post-release development for Total War Three Kingdoms has slowed down, and at a time when the longevity of the game has tapered out, Creative Assembly have released the Fates Divided DLC and the concurrent 1.7 patch cycle before the game's second anniversary. Fates Divided explores one of the most critical junctures in the Three Kingdoms history, the Guandu campaign, which concludes the rivalry between Yuan Shao and Cao Cao. Does Fates Divided and the supporting patch breathe more life into a game that's beginning to feel stale? We'll explore all that and more in this Total War Three Kingdoms Fates Divided DLC review. Yuan Shao and Cao Cao were close friends during childhood, eventually serving together in the Han civil government. Cao Cao also answered Yuan Shao's call to arms in 190 CE to form the coalition to oust the tyrant Dong Zhuo. When this coalition failed, however, their rivalry was born and would eventually pit them as obstacles to each other's dreams of ruling China. In the first campaign, Rise of the Warlords, both Cao Cao and Yuan Shao were still building up their power base, but by this DLC's timeline in 200 CE, each are the undisputed controllers of their domains. The Fates Divided storyline is a direct sequel to a World Betrayed DLC released exactly a year before. Yuan Shao has finished off his conquest of Gongsun in the north, consolidating the North China Plain, while Cao Cao, after defeating Lu Bu in the Battle of Xiapi and now in control of the Emperor, is the premier warlord of China's interior. Naturally, this situation results in inevitable conflict, and historically, this culminates in the huge Battle of Guandu that ended in a decisive victory for Cao Cao. The Fates Divided DLC follows this premise, building up the preceding events to pit Yuan Shao and Cao Cao against each other in an unavoidable struggle to the death. Besides the heated rivalry in the north, the DLC also offers a new faction, Liu Yan, controlling Yi province in the west. He is available in the 190 and 194 CE start dates, but in 200 CE his son Liu Zhang inherits his realm, and this region projects into a future storyline with Liu Bei, whom conquers the area to establish the Shu Han kingdom. Although this faction is definitely not the primary premise of this DLC, it adds Han representation to the western part of the map, which recently got an overhaul thanks to the 1.6 patch and the Furious Wild DLC. Now there's another Han faction that can contest the Nanman tribes directly. The supporting patch 1.7 is by far the more interesting changes released to the game, and unlike the DLC, is completely free and available to all players. Whilst Fates Divided adds more raw content in the form of the new 200 CE campaign, the new Liu Yan faction, and a sprinkling of new units, the 1.7 patch provides more substantial gameplay value with the addition of new mechanics, enriching of existing ones, and a plethora of new characters to complement the existing factions. As a critical event in the Three Kingdoms history and mythos, the Guandu campaign was a frequently suggested idea by the community, and Creative Assembly has no doubt followed up on popular requests. The campaign begins in 200 CE with two power blocks vying over control of the north and central China. Yuan Shao and his sons control much of the land north of the Yellow River, with incursions into Cao Cao's northeast flank. Cao Cao, in control of the Emperor, controls a swathe of land in central China. Both factions begin at war with each other, and with the entirety of this campaign's missions and narrative events adjusted towards propelling this conflict, it's fated that one of these factions will be wiped out in the first 5 to 10 years of the campaign. If you're playing either of these factions, it's perhaps even necessary to eliminate the other in order to progress your own campaign. The DLC obviously focused heavily on the Yuan Shao and Cao Cao conflict, as it brings more relevant storytelling to each, but it also adjusts the rest of the world map and character pools to fit into the historical positions of the year 200 CE. So many other warlords such as Matang, Liu Bei or Sun Ce will also be available in this new starting date. By the year 200 CE, more pivotal Three Kingdoms characters have passed away to the throes of history, such as Lu Bu and Gongsun Zan, so the patch brings more legendary characters in to compensate the losses in the roster. The patch finally makes Yuan Shao a particularly attractive faction to play, since before his faction had barely any notable characters. Now he is supported by Wen Chu, Yan Lang, and Zhang He, noteworthy legendaries that add a lot of versatility and balance to Yuan Shao's character roster. He now also has a fleshed out family tree with his sons Yuan Tan and Yuan Shang added. The only things he's really missing now is a competent strategist. On the other side of the front, Cao Cao also gets some reinforcements, in particular Yu Jin. Alongside Zhang He, who defects to Cao Cao's side during the Battle of Guandu, they finally round out the esteemed 5 elite generals of Cao Wei. Cao Cao also gets some more family members with Cao Ren, his second cousin, who is beside him from the beginning to the end, and Cao Pi, Cao Cao's second son, who after his father's death forced the abdication of the emperor and triggered the formation of the Three Kingdoms. The patch also adds Lady Zhen, an influential wife of Yuan Shao's son Yuan Si, who later marries Cao Cao's son Cao Pi after her capture, adding a bit of romantic spiciness to the competing warlords' familial dynasties. Finally, Fa Zheng, a renowned strategist, is now available for Liu Yan and Liu Zhang's faction, a character that would go on to become influential in the court of Shu Han. All these characters appear in the game freely with the 1.7 patch. The only character technically locked behind the new DLC paywall is Liu Yan himself, but like other DLCs, you can simply capture or conquer him as another faction. The DLC restriction is only for playing as him, as his own faction with his own mechanics. A new mechanic to finally give some depth to Emperorship is Imperial Intrigue. Imperial Favor is now an entirely new resource that describes how the Emperor perceives your faction and how you treat your populace. Having excess food surplus and high public order will accumulate favor every turn. Engaging in battle with other Han factions or terrorizing Han citizens will penalize your favor. Favor levels will impact diplomatic relations and faction-wide satisfaction and corruption. Factions can also issue decrees in the Imperial Intrigue screen, shifting the perception of the Emperor towards their targeted factions. These include declaring a faction an enemy of the Han, giving other factions impetus to declare war on them. Factions in control of the Emperor are impervious from many effects and hold the favor of the Emperor indefinitely, so it does incentivize going after the Emperor somewhat. There will be several missions that may arise, such as assisting a Han faction with low food. Imperial favor can also be used, and quite effectively I might add, to sway diplomatic relations, overturning dogged negotiations. Overall, the mechanic is meant to mimic the Pope from Medieval II, which commanded respect and influence across Christendom. It's meant to promote more honourable behaviour across leaders, and if anything, slow the progress of particularly ambitious commanders by making it harder to just go on a conquering rampage, whilst encouraging benevolence for one's own people. Despite this, it's entirely possible to proceed in your campaign completely ignoring Imperial Intrigue, as it is seldom useful unless you control the Emperor directly. Right now, it's a flavorful addition to the game that falls short of becoming anything worthwhile to engage with. Another new mechanic, but a bit more relevant to every campaign, is the Faction Council. Every spring, your advisors in government will provide you options to slightly improve your campaign progress. These options can range from instigating rebellions in nearby enemy provinces or giving temporary bonuses to particular regions or armies. For a small fee, the player can enact these policies that usually persist until the next Faction Council next year. Now, this is a lot more of a useful mechanic that is relevant to everyone and adds better depth to the current government mechanics, so it's a pleasing addition. It also encourages players to promote characters to all the positions as quickly as possible in order to get the most variety with their yearly policy offerings. Every advancement in faction rank will now allow more precise allocation of bonuses. Prestige points, as they are called, are given every time your faction progresses, and can be invested into increasing assignments, administrators, trade agreements, spies, or armies. This is another small but reasonably nifty addition to promote a tad bit more long-term strategization. Once the faction reaches emperorship, there is also an additional option to restore the Han Empire, rather than follow through with forcing abdication. This causes Liu Xi, the incumbent Han Emperor, to take over as your faction's leader, with all the added character mechanics that come with it. This is great for role-playing governor or Han loyalist factions that have no intention of becoming emperor themselves. The DLC provides a host of new units, including the faction-exclusive units for Liu Yan, but a new Northern Army mechanic is also provided, a unique roster that is available to either Cao Cao or Yuan Shao. The Northern Army is based on the standing volunteer army that defended the capital and acted as the Imperial Guard, situated in the north of China and thus its name. They possess elaborate shields and unique designs with stylish military uniforms. Either Yuan Shao or Cao Cao will receive the Northern Army units as an extra reward upon the first of them reaching rank 7. Therefore, the Northern Army will eventually pledge allegiance with one faction or the other, providing a lucrative set of units that is available to armies that attach the new Colonel of the Northern Army follower. These followers cannot be removed and persist with the character, so if a character defects and leaves to another faction, that faction can then recruit Northern Army units. Northern Army units are essentially slightly buffed vanilla unit variants with resistance to fatigue and formations unlocked irrespective of the commander's cunning level, so they are useful as elite units early in the campaign. It's a mechanic based on historical evidence with a decent use within campaigns, but is it interesting enough to be part of the DLC offering? Probably not, and I would have rather this be a free mechanic available to everyone. Yuan Shao is an extremely important character in Three Kingdoms lore, but has been mostly underworked in Total War Three Kingdoms until now. As Cao Cao's biggest historical rival in the opening conflicts of this period, it is only fitting that he finally is now an attractive faction to play, thanks to the new units and new legendary characters we explored before. The Yuan dynasty begins 200 CE with considerable pedigree, having secured a huge breadbasket centered around the commanderies of Wei and Anping, providing ample food and peasantry income as a strong foundation for a campaign. To his north, Yuan Shao is bordered by his second son Yuan Xi. To his east is his eldest son Yuan Tan, and to his western mountains the vassal Gao Gan. As a result, he is adequately protected and ready to focus his strike towards the south against Cao Cao. However, his three sons also vie for succession to the Yuan house, and tempering their ambitions is vital. Beware though, on higher difficulties, Cao Cao's diplomatic shrewdness will deeply divide the Yuan clan and may cause Yuan Shao's sons to defect. In my own campaign, both sons were promised support for their independence by Cao Cao and promptly declared war on me soon after, causing a familial civil war. So it's probably wise to annex them or deal with them early on higher difficulty levels. Yuan Shao's new Captain Armory is an expansion of his faction's Captain Retinue mechanics. This unique faction mechanic was meant to compensate Yuan Shao's lack of legendary commanders by providing cheap, readily available retinues to put out more numbers on the battlefield quickly than your opponents. With the introduction of some new legendary characters, of course, this mechanic understandably received an upgrade. Now lineage points can be spent to improve captain retinues, making them quite viable in the late game after successive buffs have been applied, which wasn't the case previously where captain retinues tended to drop off towards the late game. Each tier offers greater and greater rewards. Some of the more powerful buffs include enabling terror or unbreakable status. If the Northern Army also declares its allegiance with Yuan Shao, he will also have access to Northern Army variants of the Captain Retinues, which are again slightly better than the vanilla versions. These expand upon Yuan Shao's ability to quickly field entire retinues in an instant, with now the added potential of late game viability. Everyone's favorite commander, Cao Cao, was a relatively easy faction to start off with in 190 and 194 CE start dates. He had access to a range of legendary characters and is centralized near the middle of the map. As one of the belligerents of the Battle of Guandu, Cao Cao also receives much love here for his 200 CE start date, but the developers have made sure to not only improve and enhance his initial position, but also make it surprisingly more difficult to encourage some challenging gameplay. Cao Cao begins the year 200 CE with a staggering 29 counties, but is in a much more difficult diplomatic state with enemies all around him. Besides the unified front of the Yuan family from the north, Yuan Shao's ally Liu Bei also opposes Cao Cao in the east, whilst the Yellow Turbans led by Guandu have been bought out by Yuan Shao and threaten his southern borders. Furthermore, the bandit queen Zheng Jiang stalks within his eastern territories. Overall, Cao Cao's position can only be described as overextended, with most of his armies in pitched battle against his immediate enemies. His entire western section is completely exposed, making it susceptible to an aggressive push from someone like Ma Teng. Although his economic potential is insane, Cao Cao initially fields many armies and thus his income is measly at the beginning. As a result, Cao Cao's 200 CE starting position is rated as hard by Creative Assembly. Nevertheless, Cao Cao controls a huge economic strip that includes the two capitals of Chang'an and Liu Yan, and most importantly, he controls the Emperor, giving him huge initial influence. Cao Cao also begins with the largest roster of legendaries that have fled from other fallen factions. These include Zhang Liao, Kong Rong, and Wang Lang. His first mission also gives him the God of War Guandu for free. Cao Cao will appeal to those who want to start with the foundations of the Cao Wei state already in place, and assuming they defeat Yuan Shao, have the path of emperorship laid out plainly before them. Cao Cao's gameplay addition with patch 1.7 is his schemes mechanic, another use for his unique credibility resource. Cao Cao now has access to pawns, an extension of the spy system that can scheme for him in a variety of ways, accentuating his snake-like cunningness. Schemes can be operated against characters around the world to stunt or improve the potential of armies, delivered against certain commanderies to influence the populace, or against entire factions to influence the scales of diplomacy. Schemes opens up a huge potential for Cao Cao that truly cements him as the most powerful faction in the game, whether he is player controlled or AI controlled. This is Cao Cao's world, everyone else is just living in it. It also brings some nice historical flavor with the titles of schemes adapted straight from famous Chinese military proverbs found in texts such as The Art of War, The Book of Swindles, and the 36 Stratagems. Liu Yan is a new cross-generational faction that combines a humble and safe starting position with one of the most unique mechanics seen in Total War 3 Kingdoms. The entirety of this is DLC paywall locked, so you can only obtain this faction through purchasing Fates Divided. Liu Yan is available for the 190 and 194 CE starting dates. In 200 CE, his son Liu Jiang takes over his faction. In any case, they begin in the Chengdu Basin, the westernmost part of the map, a position that is impervious from most attacks. From the north, the Qinling Mountains make it difficult for armies to move, and some passes create defensive strategies optimal. The Yangtze River defends their eastern boundary, again interdicting most traffic. The only threat really is from the south, where the aggressive Nanman tribes lay, and this will be the main scope of defense for Liu Yan and his son. This nestled breadbasket provides a rich foundation for a slow and methodical growth, far away from the chaos of the deteriorating situation in the rest of China. This is the land of Shu, however, and in time Liu Bei will look towards this region as he seeks his own dominion. Their faction unique mechanic is all about inheritance and aspiration, depending on whether Liu Yan or Liu Jiang is your leader. If you're playing the father figure Liu Yan, the focus of the faction is all about safeguarding the future inheritance. This involves building up aspiration points, which is a meaningless resource for Liu Yan, but a critical one for used by his son Liu Jiang. Aspiration points can be gathered measly with conquest, but can be increased massively by making trade-offs, concessions that penalize your realm, increasing in severity over time. Furthermore, there are several tasks that can be done. Completing them will provide faction abilities Liu Yan can use in the future. When the time is right, Liu Yan can abdicate his rulership and pass on his inheritance to Liu Yan. Generally, the earlier the inheritance, the greater the initial rewards for Liu Yan, but the less time there is to reliably accrue aspiration points or complete tasks, so players must be wary on when the right time to inherit is. A late inheritance punishes Liu Yan with terrible penalties, making him an understated and incompetent ruler. Once inherited, Liu Yan's faction receives all the gathered potential generated for him, the abilities that were acquired through tasks, and all the accrued aspiration points. So the faction mechanics are very complex. As Liu Yan, the idea is to bear the burden of rule with sacrifices, a weak and feeble faction that will struggle in the early game, especially with the incessant hordes of Nanman approaching from the south. However, with the hope that in the future, his son Liu Yan will inherit his sowed seeds and reap the rewards, opening up the potential of the faction to become super powerful in the mid and late game. It's a complex faction and definitely not noob friendly, a faction that actively encourages you to punish yourself now and benefit from the fruits of your labor later. It's probably why the starting position is so safeguarded, since the early game is quite a slow slog, but its appeal will be to those who can strategize for the future in mind. It's a questionable addition to a DLC about the Guandu campaign, but I guess as the title of the DLC is Fates Divided, it makes sense that Liu Yan's fate and his son Liu Yan's fate couldn't be further apart. So, what are you actually getting with this DLC? Well, not much. A new start date in 200 CE, some more story content if you play either Yuan Shao or Cao Cao, a new faction in Liu Yan and Liu Yan, and some new units in the Northern Army mechanics. Total War Three Kingdoms Fates Divided is therefore quite a disappointing DLC. I mean, it didn't even include a historical battle for Guandu, not that it would have redeemed it in any way, shape or form. It is certainly non-essential and should only be considered for those who have already enjoyed the game massively, are in tune with the Three Kingdoms history and mythos, and want to further that experience by extending the campaign to a new start date right before the famous Battle of Guandu. For a DLC that's meant to be about Yuan Shao and Cao Cao, however, the free 1.7 patch alone is already content heavy to support these two factions, such as new legendary characters and gameplay expansion, which makes a purchase for Fates Divided questionable. The 200 CE start date also proves to be too far away from the sandbox nature that makes Total War Grand campaigns fun in the first place. With factions too well established to fail, aside from spectacular military disasters, this makes any major faction chosen new players too easy, as there are stronger, sure, but less rivals to go through. One swoop, defeat an enemy or two, and suddenly you've reached emperorship in a handful of years. At this start date, you're quite literally too big to fall, and really diverges from the humble, small starts that make Total War Grand campaigns so dynamic. I honestly don't see myself playing this start date in the future at all, and still think the vanilla 190 CE start date is superior. The Northern Army mechanic provides a subset of interfaction elite units, but even mods have added more interesting unit ideas for free. This was an okay addition, but has no intrinsic creative value. The only redeeming factor is the new faction. Liu Yan's punishing gameplay and focus on building up for the late game should be a consideration for turtle style players. It's a difficult but highly rewarding faction to play, but on its own does not merit great value for the Fates Divided DLC. For $10 US, the same price as the much better A World Betrayed and Mandate of Heaven DLCs, I cannot in good conscience recommend this DLC. The patch was excellent, the paid content not so much. For me, it's a 4 or a 5 out of 10, a mediocre addition to the Total War Three Kingdoms franchise. As of writing of this video, Creative Assembly has announced that production of Three Kingdoms has officially ended, with this Fates Divided DLC, the final content and patch cycle released. They have instead announced that they are in pre-production for another game in the Three Kingdoms universe. Whether this be a spin-off or a sequel, we'll have to wait and see. Despite the disappointment of this particular DLC, after 2 years of post-production, the overall game is a superb entry into Total War's list of historical titles. You can watch our year in review video for a more in-depth analysis of the entire game as a whole. It's been one of my favorite Total War experiences ever. Regardless, it's disappointing not to see a DLC based on the Red Cliffs campaign, as that would have been my predicted next period of exploration and would have made a great place to send off. Total War Three Kingdoms' final DLC does not end the Three Kingdoms saga with a bang. Instead, it offers a mere fizzle with undervalued paid content. Despite this, it serves as a roundup of the collective experience by offering the chance to relive the campaign of Guandu as Yuan Shao and Cao Cao battled it out for the future of China. It's not an elaborately satisfying or engaging DLC, but it is another addition for those who wish to complete their Three Kingdoms experience. This has been Total War Three Kingdoms, The Fates Divided DLC review. Please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed today's content. Special thanks to our Patreon supporters for making this video possible. If you want to support the channel further and allow the creation of more comprehensive in-depth reviews, consider subscribing on Patreon for as little as $1 a month.